Hey guys, it's Robbie. Let's cut to the chase. Deafheaven are one of the most critically acclaimed heavy metal bands of the 21st century and one of my personal favorite groups. They've pioneered the blackgaze genre of metal and are one of the heaviest artists to receive attention from the mainstream. In this video, I'm going to go over their discography as sort of a guide to anyone looking to get into the group and hopefully encourage some people to check them out. Quick disclaimer. I'm going to try and be as unbiased as possible, but my personal opinion on each album will inevitably affect how much time I spend talking about it. With that out of the way, let's get started. Deafheaven was formed in February 2010 as a project between singer George Clarke and guitarist Kerry McCoy, both of whom had previously been in the grindcore band Rise of Caligula. As for the name, the phrase Deafheaven appears in William Shakespeare's Sonnet 29. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I will alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate. When asked about this, Clarke said that while he was aware of the work's existence, he can't remember how he specifically arrived at those two words, although the combining of them was done as an homage to shoegaze pioneers Slowdive. In April of 2010, the duo entered the studio to record their Untitled 4-track demo with producer Jack Shirley. The release lays the groundwork for their later material, combining the pounding guitar and shrieked vocals of black metal with the dreamy atmospheres of post-rock and shoegaze, a genre known as blackgaze. As is the case with most demos, it didn't receive much attention from critics, although heavy metal news website Metal Sucks gave it a 3 out of 5, saying that it engulfs rather than tramples, shimmers where so much black metal rattles. Personally, I enjoyed this demo, but I can't recommend it to anyone just looking to get into the band. It's definitely an interesting deep cut for anyone who's already an established fan, but if you're new to them, you should definitely prioritize their full-length albums, the first of which I will get into right now. In 2011, the group expanded to a 5-piece, adding guitarist Nick Bassett, bassist Derek Prine, and drummer Trevor DeShriver. On April 26, 2011, they released their debut album, Roads to Judah. The album received positive reviews from critics, with Pitchfork ranking it 22nd on their 40 best metal albums of 2011. In my opinion, as far as debut albums go, this is a really good album. It's more mature sounding than their demo. Kerry McCoy's riffs and structures are better developed than those on their debut, and the songs overall sound more alive. It's not without its flaws, though. For starters, the album is only 38 minutes, stretched out between 4 songs, so it does feel somewhat incomplete, if you know what I mean. The songs themselves are good, but there are quite a few moments where the songwriting does get a bit stale. It'll occasionally venture into aimless blasting territory, which gets old pretty quickly. But despite these flaws, like I've said previously, for a debut, this is one heck of an album for Deafheaven. After touring in support of this album, Deafheaven once again found themselves reduced to 2 members, with Bassett, Prine, and DeShriver all departing. Undeterred, they re-entered the studio with drummer Daniel Tracy to record their follow-up album, Sunbather, which they released on June 11th of 2013. Where do I begin with this album? First off, I want to admit that this is not only my favorite record of theirs, but one of my favorite albums of all time, so I'm gonna spend quite a lot of time talking about it. This album sounds, for lack of a better word, enormous. The sound both envelops and pummels you like being punched in the face and hugged at the same time. A lot of this is by design, since McCoy double-tracked every lead and rhythm guitar part. Also playing a factor is the drumming of new addition Daniel Tracy. I said that Roads to Judah occasionally delve into aimless blasting territory, and Tracy solves that problem on Sunbather. While he's definitely good at playing blasting drum beats, seriously, how much coffee did they give him? He does a great job at mixing it up when needed, which results in a more varied and interesting rhythm section. George Clarke's vocals sound amazing. They recorded him in a way that gives them a lot of reverb, and it adds to the overall dreamlike tone of the album. The softer parts of the songs make them stand out as well. It can be difficult to write clean parts in heavy songs without having the transitions be too jarring, but that's not a problem here. Great examples of this are the middle section of Dream House and the introduction to Vertigo. One great thing about this album is just the way it's structured. It has 7 tracks, 4 real songs, Dream House, Sunbather, Vertigo, and the Pecan Tree, plus 3 interludes, Irresistible, Please Remember, and Windows. The use of interludes really helps it stand out. Irresistible is a guitar and piano-based instrumental that is, in my opinion, far and above the best of the 3. It's the only one of them I've listened to by itself in my spare time. Please Remember and Windows both feature sparse instrumentation with spoken word tracks overdubbed. The former features guest musician Nej of Alcest reading a passage from Milan Kundera's novel, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, and the latter features a recording of a street preacher intertwined with a recording of a drug deal. Both of these tracks, while not exactly standouts, are good at what they're trying to be. Interludes to segue between the main tracks. I would be doing you guys a disservice if I didn't explain what the title meant, since knowing it can really make the album more enjoyable. George Clarke said in an interview with Noisy that the album title is a reference to him spotting a sunbathing woman while cutting school as an adolescent. He said that she seemed perfectly content with where she was in life, which caused him to ponder what she had done to get there and what he had done to get where he was. As a result, the album overall lyrically is predominantly focused on his own personal faults and insecurities. Overall, this album is phenomenal, and definitely the first album of theirs you should check out if you're just getting into them. Critically speaking, this album is what brought Deafheaven into the forefront of heavy metal media. It received a 92 from aggregate review website Metacritic, the highest score given to an album that year. Spin, Stereogum, Rolling Stone, and Pitchfork all had it ranked as the best metal album of 2013 in their end-of-the-year lists, and Rolling Stone would rank it as the 94th best metal album of all time in 2017. Soon, Deafheaven had to undertake the hardest part of releasing an acclaimed album: writing a good follow-up. The band expanded to include guitarist Shiv Mehra and bassist Stephen Clarke shortly after Sunbather's release, and after touring in support, they began recording 2015's New Bermuda. During this time, they switched over from the Deathwish record label to Anti, which had released records by Tom Waits, Merle Haggard, and Bob Mould. Talk about a diverse roster. New Bermuda would eventually be released on October 2nd, 2015. How do I describe New Bermuda? The first adjective that comes to mind is darker. They definitely picked a fitting album cover because this album feels like it was written in a much more negative mindset than Sunbather was. It still has the streamier moments, don't get me wrong, but the more metal parts are just more aggressive. A great example of this would be the album opener Brought to the Water, which has an absolutely pounding headbanging guitar riff about 1 minute in, which really does set the tone for the album. Deafheaven very clearly leaned more into their metal influences on this record. Structure-wise, this album feels a lot more straightforward than Sunbather. Sunbather, with its segueing interludes, feels like it was written with some sort of grand concept in mind, and in a way it was. I've already explained the inspiration behind the lyrics, but in addition, George Clarke had said that the album is meant to be listened to in one sitting, which would make sense given the use of interludes. In contrast, New Bermuda feels more like a simple collection of songs written at different points, if that makes sense. That's not saying this album is disorganized or anything, because it isn't. It's just that the songs on this album sound more like they were meant to be listened to by themselves. As far as negatives go, I can't really say there's anything explicitly bad about this album. There are moments where songwriting does feel a bit uninspired, but that's inevitable with any album. The main thing holding this album back, and this was entirely down to my personal taste, the songs are enjoyable, but there isn't a tremendous amount of standout moments. I had a good time listening to this all the way through the first time I did so, but I didn't feel a great desire to listen to it all the way through again. The exceptions to this are the songs Brought to the Water and Baby Blue, both of which I heavily encourage any of you watching to check out. Critically speaking, New Bermuda was well received. It received an 85 from Metacritic, a 9.0 from Pitchfork, and Exclaim even said that it blows Sunbather out of the water, even though they gave it an overall lower score. Go figure. They toured the album more than they did the previous ones, not announcing work on a follow-up until January of 2018. During that time, they had their most recent lineup change to date, swapping out bassist Stephen Clarke with Chris Johnson. On July 13th, 2018, they released Ordinary Corrupt Human Love. Stylistically, if New Bermuda expanded on Sunbather's heavier moments, then Ordinary Corrupt Human Love expands onto softer moments. So that's not to say that this album isn't heavy, but the softer moments are given a little more time to shine. Overall, this album sounds a lot less angry than New Bermuda. Even the heavier moments are more positive in tone. One example would be the track Honeycomb, which has one of the best hooks on the album, and even features a guitar solo that wouldn't sound out of place in a Foo Fighters song. Canary Yellow also has a memorable opening hook riff that you wouldn't expect Deafheaven to write. It still doesn't sound out of place. The album doesn't have interludes per se, but it does have songs that are specifically dedicated to softer sounds, namely the opener, You Without End, as well as Near and Night People. The former features a guest appearance from Chelsea Wolfe, which was a pleasant surprise, as well as something that hadn't been done on a Deafheaven song before. George Clarke singing cleanly. Speaking of him, one interesting thing about this album is that despite its overall more positive sound, his vocals sound more gritty than they have on previous releases. If you compare the vocals to this album to those on Sunbather, there's noticeably less reverb and a lot more snarl, if you know what I mean. I don't know if maybe it was him putting his mouth closer to the mic or if the vocal tracks were treated differently in post, but it's a noticeable difference. With all these positives having been said, some of the softer parts of the album can be slightly meandering at times. You Without End, while overall a good opening track, goes on for about 2 minutes longer than it should, for example. Also, some of the heavier riffs do from time to time sound a bit uninspired, but luckily those parts aren't given much attention. Despite these flaws, this is still definitely an album worth listening to, and most critics seem to agree. It was the third straight album of theirs to receive a Best New Album title from Pitchfork, and, like its predecessor, it got an 85 on Metacritic. The track Honeycomb was even nominated for a Best Metal Performance Grammy, losing out to High on Fire. After another 3-year wait, the band released their most recent album, Infinite Granite, on August 20th, 2021, this time on record label Sargent House. I don't know how to talk about this album. Part of it is due to it not being out for very long, so there just hasn't been as much time for me to listen to it and decide what my thoughts on it are. More significantly, this is just an outlier style-wise, and I don't really know how to compare it to their other work. I said earlier that Ordinary Corrupt Human Love built on Sunbather's softer parts. Well, Infinite Granite is Deafheaven expanding Sunbather's softer parts into a whole album. This is a straight-up shoegaze release with barely any blast beat drums or screamed vocals. Honestly, I don't love it. I love Deafheaven's softer moments, but the reason those worked was that they served as a nice contrast to their moments of unrestrained brutality. Making a whole album out of them results in an album that's not in any way bad, but just unremarkable. I remember listening to this album for the first time, thinking, this is decent, and then forgetting almost all of the riffs the next day. The fact that I haven't listened to it all the way through since that first time says a lot. There are still positives from the album, I will say. Great Mass of Color, the first single, is an objectively good song, with a memorable hook and a catchy bass line. In addition, George Clarke definitely proves himself to be a good, clean vocalist. I don't know much about vocal technique, but he can carry a melody pretty well, and he has a surprising tenderness to his clean singing voice. And as badly as I have been harshing it, it is definitely a competent shoegaze record, and if that's what you're into, you'll probably like it. The album was overall well received, making it onto several Best of the Year lists. That being said, there are more middling reviews than there were for the other albums. Pitchfork, who had raved about their prior releases, gave it a 6.5 out of 10, saying, "As Infinite Granite progresses, it's hard to tell if the songs are getting weaker or if it's just your third or fourth time running up the same hill." Ouch. And that brings us up to date. If you're interested in getting into Deafheaven, my suggestion would be to listen to Sunbather first, then move on to New Bermuda if you prefer the heavier moments, or Ordinary Corrupt Human Love if you prefer the softer parts. After that, you can check out Roads to Judah if you want to hear them at their rawest, or Infinite Granite if you want to hear them at their most commercial. And also don't forget to check out the releases I didn't even get to mention, the split with Boss Dinage, and the singles From the Kettle Onto the Coil and Black Brick. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is a little different than the ones I normally do, but there's an idea I had in my head for a while, and I just wanted to make it. I'll probably do more of these in the future because, well, I had a fun time making this video, and I hope you have as much fun watching it. If you liked it, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing for more content in the future. I'm RobbieJ2734. I will see you when I see you next.